Lists are usually trash. Most channels rank for clicks, not truth. Here's our attempt to do this honestly. Top 10, ranked, cited. The standard story about these losses measures them in scrolls. 500,000 at Alexandria, 200,000 at Pergamon. Scroll counts are the wrong unit. What matters is the ratio of unique content, texts that existed in no other library, in no other city, that had not been copied out into the wider Mediterranean or transmitted east. By that measure, the ranking looks different. Libraries that made this list on their fame should probably be lower. One famous entry arguably doesn't belong on a lost list at all. Entities that hurt, most are languages you probably can't read. We're ranking by intellectual irreversibility. What's gone for good? Augustus founded the Palatine Library around 28 BCE, attached to the Temple of Apollo on the Palatine Hill. 2 halls, Greek texts, and one for Latin, set next to a portico whose design was meant to signal Rome's new cultural ambitions. At its height, it probably held tens of thousands of scrolls. Its proximity to the Augustan literary circle, it may have housed original manuscripts from the poets working nearby, though there is no direct evidence of that. It ranks last on this list for one reason: Roman. Copying culture was systematic. Literate slaves copied texts commercially. Wealthy Romans expected to own personal libraries. Major collections existed in dozens of cities. Of whatever unique manuscript might have sat in the Palatine's Latin Hall existed in multiple copies elsewhere in the empire. The library burned and was rebuilt several times, eventually disappearing in late antiquity. The institution is gone, the knowledge mostly not, the command of. The Library of Pergamon was built into the Attalid royal precinct in what is now western Turkey, Eumenes II, in the early 2nd century BCE, and became the second largest library in the ancient world. Ancient sources estimate around 200,000 scrolls, a figure to treat as approximate rather than a precise census. Its intellectual focus was broadly Greek, with particular strength in philosophy and medicine. The physician Galen, born in Pergamon roughly 300 years after the library's founding, describes the city as still thick with scholarly culture. The collection's disputed end. Of Plutarch reports that Mark Antony gave the entire Pergamon holdings to Cleopatra as a gift for the Alexandrian library. Scholars are divided on whether this actually happened or was later Antony propaganda. Regardless, the loss here is real but bounded. Pergamon's holdings overlapped heavily with what Alexandria already owned. The genuine gap is its medical library, the most concentrated Greek medical collection in the ancient world. And not everything in it made it into Galen's enormous surviving corpus. A Serapeum library was the daughter collection. A secondary branch of the Alexandrian system housed in the temple complex to Serapis in the Rhakotis quarter of the city. Not the main library. Ancient estimates suggest around 40 Zalozan scrolls, primarily overflows and working reference copies. In 391 CE, the bishop Theophilus led a crowd that sacked the temple complex and destroyed what remained. The command of. It ranks here rather than alongside the main Alexandrian entry because most of what it held duplicated the main collection. What was distinctive was different in kind, rather than in content. The Serapeum held Egyptian cultic and administrative literature in Demotic, the administrative script of late Pharaonic Egypt, that was not being copied into Greek and was not circulating in the wider Mediterranean scholarly world. A category of Egyptian priestly knowledge, temple ritual, medical diagnosis, astronomical observation in the Egyptian tradition, gun bridder the command of, ended here not in a single dramatic moment, but through the gradual collapse of the demotic scribal tradition that the temple system had sustained. The Seleucid Royal Library at Antioch is the worst documented major ancient collection. Sometime in the 3rd century BCE, in the capital of the Seleucid Empire, it held Greek philosophical texts alongside material in Aramaic and Syriac, and very likely Greek translations of Persian and Babylonian administrative and literary texts that had not made it into the Alexandrian collection. The evidence for this is inferential. We know what kind of diplomacy and administration the Seleucid state ran under the command of, and the texts that administration generated would have been collected here. By the 4th century CE, when the Emperor Julian writes about the libraries of Antioch, command of, the official collection was already a shadow of what it had been. What made the Seleucid library distinctive had dispersed or been lost over centuries of Roman rule. The specific loss is the bridging material. Aramaic, language royal correspondence. Translations of Babylonian astronomical texts. Near Eastern administrative literature in languages no other Mediterranean library was systematically collecting. The Greek content was recoverable. The rest had no other institutional home. Number 6 breaks the pattern. Ashurbanipal, the last major Assyrian king, built a systematic royal library at Nineveh in the 7th century BCE. Command of, he did not merely acquire texts. He sent scribes throughout Mesopotamia to seek out and copy clay tablet literature, medical incantations, astronomical omens, royal chronicles, flood myths, epic poetry older than Homer. An inscription in his own name describes him as a literate king who could read both Sumerian and Akkadian, unusual enough that he thought it worth advertising. Burned in 612 BCE, the fire saved the library. Clay does not combust. The palace blaze partially baked the tablets, hardening them like pottery. Austin Henry Layard excavated the site in the 1850s. He found the tablets in the rubble, still readable after 500 years. Today, roughly 30,000 of them are in the British Museum, including the standard Babylonian version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, with its flood narrative, predating the biblical account. What was not recovered? Anything written on wax boards, papyrus, or leather that coexisted with the clay. The fire erased that completely. The ranking here is a reminder that the medium determines survival, not the fire. The Imperial Library of Constantinople was founded by Constantius Tiku around the mid-4th century CE as the primary repository of classical Greek learning in the Eastern Empire. At various points ancient sources report holdings of around 120,000 volumes. A major fire reportedly in the late 5th century destroyed tens of thousands. The library was rebuilt, staffed by trained scholars, under the command of, and became the primary institution through which classical Greek literature survived into the medieval period. The paradox of Constantinople is this: the very institution that saved Greek drama, history, and philosophy also structured what we did not get. Byzantine copyists were selective. They copied Aristotle comprehensively and parts of Plato carefully, command of. They preserved authors of theological interest, and let late antique scientific commentary deteriorate, code of. They had no incentive to maintain Manichaean texts, pagan liturgical literature, or the administrative records of the Latin West. The 1204 Crusader sack and the 1453 Ottoman conquest dispersed what remained. What the Byzantine system chose to preserve is extraordinary. What it chose not to copy is a structured silence. Nalanda was a Buddhist university in what is now Bihar in northeastern India. Founded around the 5th century CE and functioning for roughly 700 years. It was not a single library, but a complex of several buildings holding Sanskrit, manuscripts of Buddhist philosophy, medicine, astronomy, logic, and grammar. Medieval accounts describe the collection occupying multiple stories, command of, and while the claimed figure of 9 million books is almost certainly a vast exaggeration, the range of knowledge concentrated here was genuinely enormous. Bakhtiar Khilji's forces burned Nalanda around 1193. Contemporary accounts describe the fire burning for months. The loss is partially mitigated by geography. Buddhist monks from Tibet, China, command of, and Southeast Asia had been visiting Nalanda for centuries and carrying texts home. Some Buddhist philosophical traditions, Nagarjuna's logic, Vasubandhu's Abhidharma analysis, survived because they had been copied east. But Sanskrit disciplines that never attracted East Asian copyist communities, command of, certain Ayurvedic treatises and grammatical commentaries in traditions without diaspora institutions are simply gone. Carthage ruled the western Mediterranean for 6 centuries. It founded trading outposts from Spain to Sicily, fought 3 wars against Rome, command of, and developed a literary tradition in the Punic language, a Semitic tongue descended from Phoenician. We know almost nothing about what was in their libraries because Rome destroyed Carthage completely in 146 BCE and, with one exception, the texts did not survive. The exception is Mago of Carthage, author of a 28-book agricultural manual in Punic. The Roman Senate, remarkably, commissioned a Latin translation after the destruction. Mago survives today only in fragments quoted by later Roman agricultural writers. That is the totality of Punic literature available to us. We have Punic inscriptions, religious dedications, tome markers, but no Punic drama, no Punic history, no Punic philosophy, no Punic poetry. The great Semitic literary tradition of the Western Mediterranean, maintained by a seafaring civilization that connected the Near East with North Africa and Iberia across 6 centuries, was silenced so completely that we cannot even enumerate what was lost. No catalog survives to tell us the titles under the command of. The scale of the erasure is invisible because the evidence of the erasure is also gone. The House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, was established under the Abbasid caliphs, beginning under Harun al-Rashid in the late 8th century and expanded substantially under al-Ma'mun. It was not only a library, but a translation and research institution. Scholars there rendered Greek, Syriac, Persian, and Sanskrit texts into Arabic and built original scholarship on top of them. Al-Khwarizmi, whose name gives English the word algorithm, worked in institutions connected to this intellectual complex. In February 1258, Hulagu Khan's Mongol forces sacked Baghdad. Contemporary sources describe manuscripts thrown into the Tigris until the water ran dark. The Persian astronomer Nasir al-Din al-Tusi salvaged several thousand manuscripts to the Maraga Observatory in what is now northwestern Iran. Most did not survive. The loss is not the Greek source texts. Those were copied widely enough to survive in fragments elsewhere. The loss is the Arabic originals, mathematical proofs, astronomical tables, medical synthesis, philosophical commentaries representing original Islamic Golden Age scholarship built on top of those translations. We can infer many of these works from citations in surviving texts. The House of Wisdom is the library whose loss you feel most precisely through what did survive, because every citation in a surviving text points at something that did not. The Library of Alexandria, founded under the early Ptolemies in the 3rd century BCE at the Mosin in Alexandria. The logic was unprecedented. Collect not a tradition or a subject, but everything. Ships arriving in Alexandria were reportedly searched. Scrolls were copied, sometimes with originals kept and copies returned. 7 reportedly set 500,000 scrolls as the target. The named losses are significant. Ancient records indicate many more complete plays by the major Greek tragedians than the handful that survive for each playwright. The heliocentric astronomical model of Aristarchus of Samos, that the earth orbits the sun, argued in full in a text now lost, exists today only in a single summary passage quoted by Archimedes. What Aristarchus actually wrote is gone. But the most significant single loss is Callimachus's Punic, a 120-volume bibliography of the entire Greek literary tradition compiled in the 3rd century BCE while Callimachus worked at the library. It listed every known author, every text, biographical detail, and opening lines for scroll identification. The Punic is also lost, surviving only in fragments. Which means we lost not just the books, but the system for knowing what the books were, under the command of. Every gap in Greek literature is larger than it looks, because we have also lost the catalog that would tell us the size of the gap. Command of the Library of Alexandria is number 1, not only because it was the largest collection ever assembled to that point. It is number 1 because it also held the document that would have let us fully enumerate what we lost. And losing that document means the books can never be completely mourned. Pull back. Scroll counts miss the point. What determined loss was uniqueness of medium, language, and institution. Clay survived fire at Nineveh. Byzantine copyists saved the Greek canon. What did not survive was whatever sat in a single, non-copied form. The Punic tradition that had no diaspora. The Arabic originals that the translations outlasted by only 2 centuries. The catalogue that would have told us what we lost. The deepest losses are the invisible ones, not the books you can name, but the books whose names are also gone. If you'd rank these differently, the comments are open. Bring evidence. Until next time.